My ex-husband took the house, the car, and every dollar we saved. Then he laughed when the judge said I could keep my aunt's old inn by the coast. He called it a rotting shack by the water. So I moved in with 2 suitcases and nowhere else to go. But behind a hidden wall in the basement, I found a letter with my name on it, and the secret my aunt had buried for 30 years. By the time my ex came back begging me to sign it over, I already knew the truth. That worthless shack was the one thing that could destroy him. My name is Laura Bennett, 36 years old, a former hospital administrator from Boston, the kind of woman people used to call dependable, because I knew how to keep smiling while everything inside me fell apart. That morning, I sat in divorce court, wearing the only cream blouse I still owned, listening as 12 years of marriage were divided into numbers, accounts, and signatures. Across the aisle sat Ethan Cole, my ex-husband. He was 39, handsome in the clean, polished way successful men often are, with dark hair, a tailored navy suit, and the calm expression of someone who had already counted his winnings before the game was over. The judge awarded him the Boston house, then the SUV, then the savings account, then most of the investments we had built together while I worked late nights, delayed vacations, and told myself his success was our success. My lawyer, a tired legal aid attorney named Mr. Harris, barely looked up from his papers. He was a thin man in his 50s with gray eyebrows, an overstuffed briefcase, and the defeated posture of someone who had seen too many people lose things they deserved to keep. And the property in Harbor's End, Maine, the judge continued, the Whitmore Inn, inherited by Ms. Bennett from her Aunt Margaret Whitmore, remains separate property. For the first time all morning, Ethan laughed. Not loudly, just enough for me to hear. He leaned toward his attorney and whispered, "Enjoy the rotting shack by the water." I didn't answer. I didn't cry. I only folded the settlement papers, placed them in my purse, and walked out of the courthouse with $11,000. No home, no car, and a building Ethan thought was worthless. Outside, Nora Fields was waiting for me by the curb. Nora was my best friend from college, a warm-faced woman with short auburn hair, sharp green eyes, and the kind of loyalty that made her show up before you even asked. "You can stay with me as long as you need," she said. For 3 nights, I slept on her couch under a blue quilt while she pretended not to whisper with her boyfriend in the kitchen. On the 4th morning, while pouring coffee, Nora hesitated. "Laura, Ethan asked me about your aunt's inn months ago." I looked up. "What do you mean?" "He wanted to know if you still owned it, if it had land, if anyone had ever made an offer." At the time, I didn't understand why that mattered. I only knew I couldn't stay on Nora's couch forever. So I packed everything I had left into 2 suitcases and bought a one-way bus ticket to Harbor's End. The bus dropped me at a small station outside Portland just after sunrise, and from there I rented the cheapest car available with the last card that still had credit on it. The drive to Harbor's End took almost 6 hours. The farther north I went, the more Boston seemed to disappear behind me. The courthouse, Ethan's smile, Nora's couch. The life I had spent 12 years building. By the time I reached the coastal road, the sky had turned gray, and the Atlantic appeared beside me like a cold, restless wall. The Whitmore Inn stood at the end of a narrow road lined with wild grass and leaning fence posts. It was larger than I remembered, but not in a comforting way. The white paint had peeled in long strips. One upstairs shutter hung crooked. The old sign near the porch still read, "The Whitmore Inn," though the letters were faded by salt and weather. My aunt, Margaret Whitmore, had been a tall, sharp-eyed woman with silver hair, a dry sense of humor, and hands that always smelled faintly of lemon soap. Looking at the inn, I could almost hear her saying, Old things only look weak to people who don't know what held them up. I dragged my suitcases up the porch steps and unlocked the front door with the brass key Nora had found in an envelope I had nearly thrown away. Inside, the air was cold and damp. The floorboards groaned under my shoes. The windows were cracked in 2 rooms, the ceiling leaked near the stairwell, and when I flipped the light switch, the hallway bulb flickered like it had to think about whether I deserved electricity. The whole place smelled of wet wood, dust, and sea salt, but in the front sitting room, something softened in me. Aunt Margaret's framed photograph still covered the wall. The harbor at sunrise, fishermen on the pier, children holding paper cups of lemonade on the porch. Her reading chair sat near the fireplace, with a faded quilt folded across one arm. On the side table were handwritten notes in her slanted script. Repair roof, call Clara, check pantry shelves. She had been gone for 2 years, yet the room still felt like she had just stepped out to buy milk. That night, I sat on the floor beside my suitcases and cried until my throat hurt. But for the first time, I wasn't crying because Ethan had left me. I was crying because I had survived him. This place was broken, freezing, and probably full of problems I couldn't afford to fix. Still, every cracked window and warped board belonged to me. No judge could divide it. No husband could claim it. No one could tell me to leave. The next morning, I opened the front door and found 3 fresh fish wrapped in brown paper on the porch. No note, just fish. It happened again the next day, and the day after that. On the 4th morning, I caught a boy no older than 12 setting the package down. He had dark curls, serious brown eyes, and a red jacket too big for him. "I'm Noah," he said, looking embarrassed. "My mom said Miss Margaret helped us once, so we helped back." Then he ran before I could ask anything else. On my 5th morning at the Whitmore Inn, rain hammered the roof so hard I could hear it leaking into 3 different rooms. I carried a bucket down to the basement, hoping to find old towels or tools. But the moment I stepped onto the last stair, the smell of damp stone and rust wrapped around me. The basement was low-ceilinged, cramped, and packed with things Aunt Margaret had never thrown away. Broken lamps, paint cans, lobster traps, cracked picture frames, and boxes labeled in her sharp handwriting. I was moving an old shelf when my elbow hit the back wall, and instead of a solid thud, I heard a hollow knock. I froze. Then I tapped the wall again. Hollow. The sound came from a section of dark wooden paneling behind a stack of storm shutters. My first thought was that the wall had rotted through. My second thought was that Margaret would never have wasted space by accident. I found a screwdriver in a coffee tin, worked out the first nail, then another. The wood groaned as I pulled the panel loose. Behind it was a narrow outline of a door, no taller than my shoulder, with a small iron lock covered in dust. The key from Margaret's old envelope did not fit. But after 20 minutes of searching through basement drawers, I found a ring of rusted keys hanging from a nail beside the furnace. The 4th key turned. The little door opened inward, with a scraping sound that made my skin tighten. I lifted my flashlight and saw a hidden room, barely large enough for one person to stand inside. There were metal file boxes stacked against the wall, rolled maps tied with faded string, a leather notebook, and an envelope resting on top of everything. My full name was written across it. Laura Ann Bennett. My hands shook as I opened the envelope. Inside was a letter from Aunt Margaret. She wrote that she knew I would come back to Harbor's End one day, not because I failed, but because I had finally run out of places where people could use me. She told me to take the documents to Samuel Reed, her attorney. Samuel, she wrote, was a quiet man with silver glasses, a neat gray beard, and an office near the harbor where the floor always smelled faintly of old paper and coffee. Then came the warning. Do not call Ethan. Do not tell his family, and do not trust anyone who suddenly cares about this inn. I opened the first file box and spread the papers across the floor. Most of the legal language meant nothing to me, but some words stood out clearly. Pier ownership, coastal parcels, harbor access rights, private ferry agreement. There were maps of the shoreline marked in red pencil, old tax receipts, contracts, and photographs of land I had walked past without understanding. The inn was not alone. It was connected to something larger, something carefully protected, something Ethan had laughed at because he had not known where to look. At the very back of the room, wrapped in a towel, I found a small tape recorder. The batteries inside were dead, but a box beside it held spares still sealed in plastic. When I pressed play, the machine hissed, clicked, and then Aunt Margaret's voice filled the tiny room. Older, weaker, but unmistakably hers. "Laura," she said, "if you found this room, it means they underestimated you. Good. Let them keep doing that." I sat on the cold basement floor, surrounded by secrets, and for the first time since the courthouse, I was not afraid of what came next. The next morning, I drove into the heart of Harbor's End with Margaret's letter folded inside my coat pocket and the file box strapped into the passenger seat like it might disappear if I let it out of sight. Samuel Reed's office sat above a bait shop near the harbor, reached by a narrow staircase that smelled of coffee, salt, and old varnish. His name was painted on the frosted glass door in faded black letters. When I knocked, a man in his late 60s opened it. He had silver glasses, a neatly trimmed gray beard, and calm eyes that looked as if they had been waiting for me for years. "You're Laura Bennett," he said, not as a question. "Margaret said you would come in carrying more fear than luggage." He stepped aside and let me in. His office was small but orderly, lined with filing cabinets, nautical maps, and shelves of legal books with cracked leather spines. I set the box on his desk. "I found these behind a wall," I said. Samuel looked at the envelope with my name on it, then lowered himself slowly into his chair. Then she was right about the timing. He began with the inn. The Whitmore Inn, he explained, was only the visible piece. Aunt Margaret had owned it outright, but over 30 years she had quietly purchased 12 coastal parcels stretching along the east side of Harbor's End. Some were rocky strips of beach, some were wooded bluffs, some were narrow pieces of land no one had cared about until developers discovered that ocean views could turn dirt into gold. She had also bought the old fish warehouse near the pier, the private dock behind it, and something Samuel called exclusive harbor passage rights. I stared at him. Passage rights? He opened one of the maps and tapped a blue-marked channel leading into the harbor. The only privately controlled access route deep enough for commercial boats during low tide. Margaret acquired the rights in the 90s when the old ferry company collapsed. People laughed at her then. He looked at me over his glasses. They are not laughing now. Then he said the words that made the room tilt. All of it was held inside the Whitmore Coastal Trust, created by Margaret before her health failed. I was the sole beneficiary. Based on current offers, zoning pressure, and resort interest in the area, the holdings could be worth as much as $14 million. I could not speak. The woman my family dismissed as a stubborn old innkeeper had spent 3 decades building something no one could steal from me. Samuel opened a worn ledger and turned it toward me. In Margaret's handwriting, beside each rejected offer, she had written the same sentence: "Do not sell Laura's Refuge." The first entry was dated 9 years ago. 9 years ago, Ethan and I were still hosting dinner parties in Boston, still smiling for holiday cards, still pretending our marriage was solid. My aunt had seen something I had refused to name. I left Samuel's office with copies of the trust papers and a heavier kind of silence inside me. Outside, gulls cried over the docks and fishing boats rocked against the pilings. Harbor's End looked different now. The broken inn, the cold rooms, the leaking roof, the boy leaving fish on my porch. None of it felt random anymore. Margaret had not left me a burden. She had left me a shield. For 3 days after Samuel told me the truth, I moved through the Whitmore Inn like someone carrying a secret too large for her own body. I did not call Nora. I did not call my mother. I did not even call Ethan, though part of me wanted to hear his voice and test whether I could now recognize every lie inside it. Then, on Thursday morning, my phone lit up with his name. I watched it ring until it stopped. A minute later, a text appeared. "Laura, we need to talk." The next messages came softer. He said he was worried about me. He said divorce made people cruel. He said he hoped I understood he had never wanted me to end up alone in some old inn on the edge of the ocean. I almost laughed when I read that part. The same man who had taken the house, the car, and every account we shared was suddenly concerned about where I slept. I placed the phone face down and went back to scraping old paint from the porch railing. That afternoon, a black sedan rolled slowly up the gravel road. Ethan stepped out, wearing a charcoal coat and the same careful expression he used whenever he wanted to look sincere. He smiled like a man visiting a sick friend, not like a man who had helped empty her life. "Laura," he said gently, "you don't have to do this alone." I stayed on the porch, one hand resting on the railing Margaret had painted years ago. "Do what alone?" I asked. He glanced toward the inn, then past it, toward the harbor road. "This place is a lot to manage. If there are offers or legal complications, I can help you handle them." There it was. Not grief, not guilt. Interest. I looked straight at him and asked, "Did you come here for me, Ethan? Or for the coastal resort project?" His face held still, but only for a second. His eyes shifted first. That was enough. 12 years of marriage had taught me how he looked right before a lie. Later that night, Samuel confirmed what I already felt in my bones. Coleman and Pierce Capital, Ethan's investment firm, was one of the financial groups behind the resort company pursuing Margaret's land. Ethan had known more than he ever admitted. Maybe not everything, but enough. Enough to ask questions before the divorce. Enough to leave me desperate. Enough to believe I would sell the only thing he had failed to take. Then Nora called. Her voice cracked before she even said hello. She confessed Ethan had offered her a position at Coleman and Pierce months earlier, if she could encourage me to let go of the inn. Nora had refused, but she had been afraid to tell me, afraid I would think she had betrayed me. For a long moment, I said nothing. Then I told her the truth. "You should have told me sooner. But you didn't sell me." We both cried. And for the first time since court, one broken thing between us began to mend. The legal notice arrived in a cream envelope, thick enough to feel expensive. Samuel called before I even opened it. His voice was calm, but not relaxed. Ethan and his attorney had filed a motion to reopen the divorce settlement, claiming I had hidden valuable marital assets from the court. I sat at Aunt Margaret's kitchen table with the envelope in front of me, staring at the words until they blurred. Hidden assets. Bad faith. Failure to disclose. The accusations sounded official, polished, and poisonous. The truth was simple. I had known nothing about the Whitmore Coastal Trust until after the divorce was final. During the hearing, I thought I had walked away with a broken in and $11,000. Ethan knew that, or he should have. But this was never about truth. It was about pressure. Samuel explained that even a weak claim could freeze everything for months, maybe longer. The land could not be sold, leased, borrowed against, or used as security while the trust was under legal challenge. That was when fear hit me hardest. $14 million in property sat around me, and I could not touch a penny of it. My bank account was almost empty. The roof still leaked. The hallway wiring sparked when it rained. Ethan did not need to win quickly. He only needed to make the fight so expensive, so exhausting, and so frightening that I would beg for a settlement just to breathe again. I knew that strategy. I had lived inside it for 12 years. Then Samuel asked me to bring every file from the hidden room. I drove to his office with the metal boxes in the back seat, and my stomach twisted in knots. We worked through the papers one folder at a time, until Samuel stopped at a blue binder I had barely noticed. Across the cover, in Margaret's handwriting, were 2 words: Harbor Shield. Inside were signed legal opinions, trust formation records, notarized statements, and a letter from Margaret explaining that I had never been told about the trust for my own protection. Before Samuel could file the response, another piece of the puzzle arrived through Noah. The boy came to the inn with fish wrapped in brown paper, but this time he looked nervous. He said 2 men in suits had been asking questions at the docks, whether I was alone, whether I planned to sell, whether Margaret had left other papers. Noah had told his mother, Clara Morales, a hard-working single mother with kind eyes and a voice that became steel when her son was scared. Clara called Samuel immediately. By the end of the week, Samuel had found 3 witnesses who remembered Ethan asking about Margaret's land years before the divorce. One was Clara, one was the bait shop owner, one was a retired ferry captain. Their statements proved Ethan had investigated the property long before I knew it mattered. When Samuel placed Harbor Shield and those witness statements together, his calm eyes finally sharpened. "Laura," he said, "he wanted to make you look dishonest. Instead, he proved he was watching this land before he ever left you." Ethan's lawsuit collapsed 11 days after Samuel filed the Harbor Shield response. The withdrawal notice was only 2 pages long, but I read it 4 times at Margaret's kitchen table. No apology, no explanation, just legal language admitting they were backing away. Samuel called it a quiet retreat. I called it the first clean breath I had taken since the courthouse. But the next morning, his voice changed again. "The resort group wants a meeting," he said. "And Laura, they sound nervous." The reason was simple. Without my pier, my harbor passage rights, and the narrow road access through Margaret's eastern parcels, their luxury resort was nothing more than expensive drawings in a boardroom. They had already bought land on the opposite side of Harbor's End. They had hired architects, filed early permits, and promised investors a waterfront destination. But they could not move boats in at low tide, could not build the main entrance, and could not control the shoreline without what Margaret had left me. Their first written offer was $14 million for everything. The inn, the pier, the warehouse, all 12 parcels, and every right attached to them. I held the paper while standing on the back porch, watching gulls circle above the water. $14 million could have bought silence, distance, and a new life far from Ethan. For one moment, I imagined leaving Maine behind and never hearing the name Harbor's End again. Then I looked at the old inn, the dock, the boats rocking in the gray morning, and I remembered Margaret's words in her ledger. Land is not just money. Land is the right to decide. Selling would make me rich once. Keeping it would make me free every day after that. So I told Samuel no. Not a hesitant no. Not an emotional no. A clear one. They can use part of it, I said, but they will never own it. We built the proposal over 3 nights. A 75-year lease. I would keep every deed. The company would pay annual rent, a percentage of resort revenue, strict environmental protections, restoration funds for the harbor, and penalties if they damaged the shoreline. Samuel's legal assistant, Maya Grant, a careful young woman with dark curls and a habit of underlining every important sentence twice, helped shape the terms until even Samuel smiled. My final condition was personal. The contract had to create the Margaret Whitmore Scholarship Fund for children in Harbor's End, beginning with students from fishing families like Noah's. When Clara heard, she cried into her apron at the small diner where she worked mornings. That was when I understood this was no longer just about beating Ethan. Margaret had left me power. I was finally learning how to use it, without becoming the kind of person who had once used me. The final negotiation took place in Samuel Reed's office on a clear Friday morning, with the harbor glittering beyond the windows like it had decided to witness everything. Across the table sat the resort company's representatives, their attorneys, and a senior executive from Coleman and Pierce Capital. I wore a navy dress Nora had mailed to me with a note that said, "Walk in like Margaret raised you." Samuel sat beside me, calm as stone, with the lease agreement stacked neatly in front of him. We had just begun reviewing the final terms when the office door opened without a knock. Ethan walked in wearing a dark suit and the same confident expression he used to wear in boardrooms and courtrooms. "Sorry I'm late," he said, as if the meeting had been waiting for him. No one answered. He moved toward the table, pulled out a chair, and said, "I think it's best if I help clarify Coleman and Pierce's position." I looked at him for a long moment. For once, my hands did not shake. "You don't have a position here, Ethan." His jaw tightened. I stood slowly, letting every person in that room hear me clearly. "You took the house, the car, and every dollar we saved, but you cannot take what my aunt left for the woman you underestimated." The room went silent. Ethan's face changed first to anger, then to panic. Samuel opened a folder and slid the documents across the table. Witness statements, Ethan's old inquiries about Margaret's land, the offer he made Nora, and the legal motion he had used to freeze the trust while Coleman and Pierce was negotiating. The senior executive read every page without speaking. Then he looked at Ethan and said only 6 words. "You should leave this room now." Ethan did not argue. That was how I knew he understood. The power he thought he had was gone. Within a week, Coleman and Pierce terminated him for conflict of interest and attempted interference. I did not celebrate loudly. I signed the 75-year lease, kept every deed, secured annual income, revenue sharing, environmental protections, and the Margaret Whitmore Scholarship Fund. Noah became the first student named for it. Clara cried when Samuel handed her the letter. Nora came to Harbor's End that weekend, rolled up her sleeves, and helped me paint the porch. By autumn, the old sign came down. In its place, I hung a new one. The Whitmore House, a place for second chances. Clara opened a small coffee window beside the inn, serving fishermen before sunrise. Nora visited often enough that the spare room became hers. And me? I stopped feeling like a woman pushed out of her own life. I became the woman holding the keys, deciding which doors opened, and which people would never step inside again. So tell me, if you were in Laura's place, what would you have done? Would you have taken the $14 million and walked away forever? Or would you have kept the land, protected your aunt's legacy, and forced everyone who underestimated you to play by your rules? And what about Ethan? Did he deserve to lose his career after everything he tried to steal? Or do you think Laura should have shown him mercy after the truth came out? Drop your answer in the comments. I really want to know what you would choose. If this story moved you, please hit like and subscribe to the channel, because there are many more powerful, emotional, and unbelievable stories waiting for you here.